Hey everybody, Jason Burmis here, and we've got a really great broadcast for you. We're simulcasting this one, but it is a little dangerous to talk about the subjects that we're going to be talking about on YouTube. But if you saw the thumbnail and you saw the title of this one, I really do think, especially for the generation that is fighting this predator class now, it all starts with 9/11, and it all starts with the truth of that day. And because of that, I actually have on with me Richie Scola, who is a former member of the FDNY, someone who actually lived through the events of 9/11, and someone I met at the Capitol the day before the big event, I guess we'll call it. And we had a really long discussion and kind of how he's come full circle from that day to seeing all these problems with this country, and like me, sometimes not knowing exactly what to do about them other than to try to make our voices heard. So, Richie, with that said, why don't you introduce yourself to my audience, and then we can really get into your work as a first responder in the FDNY and go from there.
Cool. Well, Jason, thank you so much for having me on your show. I'm a big fan for many years, going back to the very first release of Loose Change, 9/11, really something that kind of was pivotal for, I guess, my awakening, you might say, to some of the questions about that day. But yeah, Rich Scola. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina now. My wife and my three kids spent 10 years with the FDNY. In Engine 285, Ladder 142 in Ozone Park, Queens. Before that, I spent 2.5 years as an NYPD police officer before I transitioned over to the FDNY. So before that, I was a Navy veteran, did 4 years during Desert Storm. So, talk about an awakening. I was the guy that was red, white, and blue through and through, USA, blinded by a lot of the things that just young, well-meaning, uninformed people, patriots, wannabe patriots, are all about. And that was kind of my mindset. Loved my time in the military. It was a great experience. Did my 4 years, moved on. Spent some time in the NYPD, and that was great. Came from a blue-collar family. My dad was a police officer for 34 years. I wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed, so just barely getting out of high school. I knew I wasn't going to college, so I ended up going in the military, and that ended up being a great thing. And my dad was pounding us when we were younger. Hey, take the civil service test. It's like anything else. Your dad's a steam fitter. He gets you into the electrical union if he's an electrician or plumber. I just come from that background, and my dad was smart enough to push me and my brother, who was also a retired fireman, to take the civil service tests. And, at the time, we said, we're not going to be cops. We're not going to be firemen. And then he says, you never know where you'll be in 5 years. Sure enough, we weren't too bright, neither one of us, and we ended up being regular blue-collar guys. And
well, I don't know if it's brightness. I got to tell you, I went to a SUNY school, right? And I'm upstate New York, and so many of those kids are from Long Island or from Queens or Brooklyn. And a lot of those guys not only get the 4-year degree, but take the civil service test just so they can retire in 20, 25 years. So they end up working for the subway system, or they do want to be police officers and they want to get rank or be able to go up the ladder further. So honestly, a lot of my friends who are in their like late 20s to early 40s did that same thing. I even had a buddy of mine who ended up doing became a Navy SEAL after graduating from college. Was not in the military beforehand, and went hardcore afterwards, and he did it. And it was really surprising to me. But you come from generational service, just like you said.
Yeah.
And, you transitioned from the military into the police force into the FDNY. And I don't think that, especially now that we're almost 20 years removed from that event, unless you were there in that epicenter, you really can't even, sure, the country was under a spell, we were all scared, but when you were in that epicenter, and I mean close enough to see the smoke coming out of the ground, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's a whole nother level. Me even being in upstate New York and then trying to go visit afterwards, I mean, it was almost surreal. Even the amount of military that was on the streets in the very beginnings of that, the effort to, and at first, first week or so, it was a rescue effort.
Sure.
But after that, obviously, it changed quite significantly. Why don't you take us through not only that day, but what it felt like to be in New York City in the weeks and months after that?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I can remember I happened to be coming on duty that morning, and I remember being in the firehouse, and there's usually the change of tours about 9 a.m., and then most guys are in about 7:30, 8 o'clock, and everybody's coffee and having a little breakfast or whatever, cutting up, joking, and I remember somebody saying, "Hey, turn the TV on. Some idiot flew a Cessna into the Trade Center." And so we're in there drinking coffee, looking at it, and it was just like, how the hell did somebody fly a Cessna into the, how do you miss that? How do you make that error, right? And now the citywide radio that's on in the firehouse, it's transmitting all over all 5 boroughs, and you're hearing different reports coming over. And we're looking at the hole, you're looking at the smoke coming out. You're like, wow, that looks like an awful lot of damage for a Cessna. And lo and behold, they started being reports of a commercial airliner, and then immediately going to second alarm, and you hear all the chaos going on the radio. And as we're sitting there and you're hearing things develop over the radio, and we're talking in the firehouse, thinking, man, if you're a Manhattan company, you're at ground zero. You got to hump up those stairs. That's no easy fire to deal with. And so with that, the second, time's going by, everybody's kind of speculating what's going on. There's still some fuzzy details, even over the citywide radio. And then the second plane hits. And that's when everybody just kind of realized, you kind of, it's like a gut check. You're like, this is more than anybody, really signs up for, right? This is it's just, you have that anxiety, that fear, of the uncertainty of what, country being under attack, whatever was being reported. And then the tones go off in the firehouse, and being that we were a Queens firehouse, it was kind of like, first alarm, second alarm, all the units surrounding Manhattan start to respond to Manhattan. We responded from Queens to cover the Brooklyn units that were out of their firehouse reporting, heading into downtown Manhattan. And that's kind of the progression. Mm-hmm. So, it was surreal. There was a lot. I'd be lying if you said we weren't kind of fearful, right? You're going against something that you're hearing terrorist attack, and you're wondering, what else is going to be blowing up, or what else could be potentially hit. You're hearing reports about, the Pentagon and, what's going on with the plane going down. And it's just, it was really just a really crazy time, And you're looking at each other in the face, and we go to fires, and it's a brotherhood, and everybody's got everybody's back. But that day, everybody had each other's back, and it's just one of those things like, hey man, you're suiting up, and you don't even know. This is something that we've, never dealt with before. So, man, it was an honor to serve with the guys that I served with alongside. Those guys were just amazing. Just amazing bravery and heroism that I witnessed, not only on that day, but the days following. We reported down to the ground zero the next morning. We were getting off, and at that time there was no getting off. Whether guys were just voluntarily, it was like all hands on deck. There was nobody going home. Everybody knew that when those towers collapsed, that there was not only firefighters and police officers, but there was civilians and massive loss of life. And just doing what we do for a living, everybody was all hands on deck. Instead of heading home, we headed down to ground zero to start the rescue and recovery. And it was just crazy. I remember, the streets were empty, the cities, the highways, we kind of went right in. We had the fire department placard. So we got right down to ground zero, at least as far as we could get. And then we walked with our gear. And I just remember it being like eerily like a snowstorm, that eerie quietness, that still the visibility was pretty bad. The smoke for weeks, the smoke was billowing, but southern Manhattan was just, covered for a couple of weeks there, pretty dense. But I remember just walking as we got closer, walking through what seemed like moon dust, right? You would think it was the craziest thing. And going back now, I think about it. But at the time, I remember looking around going, 210-story buildings, and it's like it was like dust, just
pulverized
inches.
Concrete. That's one of those things again that's kind of forgotten about. Unless you remember through those days, you see those pictures, but it just wasn't a woman coming out and looking like she was covered in dust. No, for, like you said, days and weeks afterwards, the closer you got to that epicenter, you could be just as covered. That was pulverized concrete from massive buildings. You know, again, for those that were never in them, and I was in them several times as a kid, or even around them, you know, if you walked by them and you looked up, you could possibly get vertigo from looking too much because they would kind of bend in on you. And one of the things that I always used to remember when we visited my great aunt in Brooklyn is she was in a big skyscraper herself. You know, New York's unlike any other city. You go out to California, great. Maybe they got some 20-story, maybe some 30-story stuff, or even Boston, 20, 30 stories. New York City has these just giant skyscrapers all over. So I remember being up there in her building and just looking out the window and seeing the World Trade Center towering over everything else. I mean, it was one of those things that it is still, to me, hard to fathom, those things being pulverized the way they were. So I would kind of be remiss, especially now that, you know, you've kind of talked about, you know, coming around, questioning them, especially thinking about that concrete, about what your experience was with Building 7 on that day, or if you were even aware about it. And when you started questioning what happened there at a 47-story skyscraper, one that would have dominated the skyline in the cities I just mentioned.
Right. And now that's, yeah. And to be honest, yeah, never questioned Building 7 until I saw your, until I saw Loose Change, to be honest with you. Embarrassed but to say that, but, you know, it was just, there was so much going on that day, and being on the ground and how vast the area was that we were consumed in. You know, it was the Building 7 phenomenon was really that's the smoking gun. You know, you could say people have different sides of what they believe happened. I tend to believe, you know, in the story of, you know, there's more to it, and I peeled back the onion layers over the years, but clearly what we were sold was not the truth, right? And that's what we're all seeking. And you guys did a great job of posing questions that need to be considered. But yeah, I mean, Building 7 is the smoking gun. And it did come out, I think it was about 4:30, 5 o'clock that day is when it came down. I wasn't in that area. We came down, like I said, we responded to Brooklyn. We got there in ground zero, my unit, the next morning. So as we were getting off, because they had to have guys to cover, you know, the city.
Oh, I know.
Have all the units down there. So.
Well, let's talk about that, because a lot of people don't understand that either. They think that everybody's just going to rush into the epicenter of Manhattan. However, you have all these different bridges, you know, the Tappan Zee at the time, the Brooklyn Bridge, where you're trying to secure all these different areas. There are reports coming in, for instance, of explosives.
Right.
We could talk about the vans that were pulled over. I feature that in Fabled Enemies. But that was very, very real. There were police checkpoints. I mean, again, this is... Again, if you've never been to New York City, you just can't fathom how big it actually is and how many people are actually there. So it was a huge effort. And like you said, people were rotating in, but, you know, some people weren't leaving for days. Like they want, you know, like they wanted to see their brother or, you know, their uncle that was in, you know, that was still in there and holding out hope. Again, it was one of those moments that in the moment, it was just so emotional. You can see how they were able to manipulate so many people.
Totally. And it's amazing because I'm sure we'll get to current day, but I don't want to get off the beaten path. But you're right. It was polarizing, right? The fear and anxiety that was being pumped out through the propaganda on the media, the mainstream media. Looking back now, I see it much differently. But at the time, I was just as mesmerized and paralyzed and manipulated as most American people. But yeah, to your point, yeah, it was everybody off duty. They were calling off duty firemen, cops, everybody. It was everybody, all hands on deck. People with just, I remember being at ground zero that on the 12th, the morning of the 12th, and walking up, and there was no command center like at a big incident. You'd have everything's organized and a command. It was a free for all. It was just chaos, and it wasn't just firemen that were doing heroic things. You know, there was carpenters, iron workers, doctors. I mean, you saw regular people just wanting to help, right? And then it was, you know, as the couple of days went by, it got a little more organized, and they kind of kept the civilian population out and kind of kept these emergency service folks. But I can tell you, the first couple of days, it was anybody wanted to just lend a hand. It was devastating. And I remember, being very optimistic going down there with the guys that we went down there with. We're like, we know there's people buried, we're going to find somebody. It's just kind of what we do, right? We're going to go in there. And I remember looking at the pile and just being like, I could see guys climbing I-beams sticking out of with a hole that just went into the abyss. Who knows how many stories. I mean, I'm thinking to myself, how many guys are going to die just trying to save, just trying to climb to search and rescue. And
well, let's talk about that for a minute too, because again, everybody sees these towers and they think that, well, base level, that's about where they end. There was 10 more stories below that people are not, it went through the subway system. You know
Absolutely.
what I mean? And again, if you don't understand that, just those 10 stories below, those elevator shafts, what happened to Willie Rodriguez, and Felipe, I forget what his name was, but he was burned. I mean, I remember all those incidents, and that was kind of pushed to the side. They didn't want to talk about the incidents that had happened in the subway or the basement that were, autonomous from the planes. Dare I say it,
Sure,
And again, I'll never forget, because it was 6 months to the day of 9/11 that they released that first Naudet Brothers documentary. And again, you're just so mesmerized, you're not thinking for yourself. But when they walk into that lobby and the marble is blown off the walls in the lobby and the glass that was like this thick is blown out in the lobby, and then there's not really burn marks, you're like, you should have immediately questioned it, because I remember being in that lobby and that just seems like such an impossibility, where the plane was so high and so low. I don't want to get off on any tangents, but when you look at all these events, it speaks to the power that's been able to mesmerize us to this day, to shut our businesses down, to tell us when and where we can see our families, whether or not we can travel outside of the country if we take a jabby jab. Now, again, we're on YouTube, so I've got to be careful with all this stuff, Richie.
All right, hopefully I don't blow it.
Well, no, I don't. You've been a great guest so far, and I think obviously my audience is enjoying this conversation. But let's fast forward. So you get out of the FDNY, you get into other business, you move out of New York, and eventually you land in D.C. Just before January 6th and meet me. Tell me that transition of leaving the force, kind of becoming more awake to what was going around you, to the point where you come out to what ends up being probably the next biggest historical event in this country.
Crazy, right? Go figure.
Yeah, since 9/11. So go ahead.
Yeah, so after 10 years, due to medical conditions from the environment down at Ground Zero, I was forced to retire early, and just mentally needed a change. I had 3 young babies at the time, and my wife, and just needed to get out of New York. The FDNY was a job that I wouldn't even call it a job. It was the best. If you know anybody that's a fireman, there's an old saying: you see somebody in traffic on their way to work smiling, it's probably a New York City fireman, and it's true. It's a brotherhood, and it was the best 10 years that I worked with the highest caliber people I've ever met in my life. I met in the firehouse, and I was blessed to do that. But my path was cut short, and we just needed a transition. So we moved. My best friend had moved to Charlotte, North Carolina. Originally, we were looking in Florida, because that's the progression. You go from New York to Florida. And I just knew I needed a change, which was kind of tough because my whole family was up in Long Island still. But mentally, it was just needed a fresh start. So we moved to Charlotte, North Carolina in October of 2006. And then I just, I was Richie the fireman, right? That was my identity. Now I had to kind of reinvent myself. And so got a little bit into real estate and mortgages at the time. And then the 2008 crisis hit. And that wasn't the best time to cut into the business, but I kind of grinded my way through it. And I've been in the real estate business doing fix and flip type stuff and doing some other investment properties pretty much ever since then. So that's kind of the path that I'm on. But I've always, since 9/11 and since leaving the FDNY, I've always, one of the things that films like yours and you're coming across folks like, there's guys in the truth alternative, I call it the alternative media, the truth media, whatever you call it. Just a lot of questions. And it's been a journey ever since then to kind of understand some of the things that just didn't add up. And so I've always been now, I mean, I've ruined, once I figured I was awake, right? I figured I had it all figured out, you know, and I knew 9/11 was an inside job. I ruined more holiday parties and birthday parties by talking about it. And people just did not want to hear it, even though I think they just kind of nodded out of respect because, oh, Rich is a fireman, he's hurting. But they didn't want to hear. They couldn't comprehend that the government or whoever, the deep state, whatever you want to call it, had something. There was something more behind the events of 9/11 than we were being sold as the sheeple, right? We're the sheeple people. That's what we do.
Well, you know what? Let me stop you there because I think it's important, you know, because people get turned off when you use that or chattel or whatever. But, you know, Kristi Noem, you know, and I'm not a Republican, I'm not a conservative. You know, I'm just concerned with authoritarianism, and she's been the one governor to really stand up to at least the state-run or federal authoritarianism. In her CPAC speech, you know, in the last, 10 minutes or so, she actually says, you know, these people want to be our shepherds, but for that to happen, we have to be the sheep. And I'm not going to be a sheep. So when we say that, it's not out of disrespect to everybody else. It's to try to wake them up to understand this is their modicum of language towards us. They put this on paper. They say it out loud. And let me tell you, the predator class feels it in their heart of hearts. And that's why we're in the situation we are now. So I didn't want to cut you off too much, but
No.
That was an important point. So, you know, you get to that point, you're ruining parties. I'm
that guy. I'm that guy. Nobody wants to be near, right?
You know, I started my film Invisible Empire, you know, with me, you know, ruining parties, being a beer pong champ. And, you know, even before 9/11, I was that guy. You know, I mean, not 9/11. I'm sorry, before I put out Loose Change. You know, before 9/11, sure, I was questioning stuff. But, you know, the stuff that was out there, you could barely get MK Ultra documents. And, you know, that was so far long ago. And you're a kid. That's not today. It wasn't something you talked about too much. And JFK was something I was interested in. The UFO phenomena, all that stuff was interesting. But it didn't feel like skin in the game the way 9/11 did. And then all of a sudden this war machine. Because like you were talking about, you'd spent time in Desert Storm. Now, you're a little bit older than me. But I can tell you right now, I remember that as the first televised war. I totally remember CNN putting that on there, and Saddam Hussein was the bad guy, and Schwarzkopf was the good guy, and we had playing cards to tell us that if they were the good guys. They had Topps trading cards on top of it. And, you know, those were things that you hadn't seen in our generation before, right? It was more Cold War. It was more Russia. Gorbachev. I was doing the duck and cover drills. That was the big fear, right? And it's crazy that 30 years later, they're using that same propaganda, you know, cycle again. But it didn't feel as real. 9/11 made it very, very real. So, you know, I understand getting to that point and, you know, somewhat changing your life. Where does it spark to where you're starting to take action? It's not just talking to people.
Yeah, so I think, you know, so it's kind of one of those things. It's those 5 stages of awakening, right, that you go through. You have, you know, denial, which is, you know, then anger, then bargaining, then decision-making, then acceptance, right? So it was over the years, the whole 9/11 experience for me, it was going through those 5 stages of awakening, you know? And, you know, a lot of the people that I researched and a lot of the information that was uncovered, it's just kind of realized like, wow, this is kind of what I'm going through. And it really helped me get to the acceptance phase. And then once I got through acceptance, now it's like, you know, like you just posed the question, what can you do? You know, do you get involved politically? You know, so I'm a kind of a political atheist. I'm not really, I mean, I voted Republican, I voted Democrat, and then I stopped voting because I realized that it really doesn't, in my opinion, it probably, realistically, your vote doesn't count. Now, that was before this election. My kids are in high school and they're learning about voting. So they're like, Dad, what do you mean? Mom's going to vote. Aren't you going to go vote for Trump? And I did not vote for Trump. I am not a Trump guy. It's not that I don't like Trump. But so I went just to go through the motion and I voted Libertarian because that's most ideologically what I would align with. Not that I like to categorize myself in any one of these camps.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it's the system we're in. But so I consider myself a political atheist. And I don't know me and my wife, how did I get to D.C.?
Yeah.
I just happened to be walking in the neighborhood one day. Me and my wife were walking, and we got back, and I said, you know what? I said, I don't know what it is, man. I don't know the universe. I don't know what it was. It's like, I got to go to DC. Like I said, I didn't vote for Trump, but it was interesting when the whole Trump thing started. The narrative of, the white hats, and he's going to take back the country, and he's got people working behind the scenes, and General Flynn and this and that. And I got to be honest, deep down in my heart, I have 3 kids. I am somewhat numb to believing anything that comes out of whether Republican or Democrat or the hopium on either side, right?
Yeah.
So I'm kind of jaded. So but they did a great job with all these movies that came out and all this, all these people that are on these YouTube personalities talking about Q and this and that. And I mean, you'd be crazy. I'd be remiss if I didn't say, man, I hope this really could happen. I didn't believe that it was going to, because I'm just so jaded from 20 years of researching all these false flags and illegitimate wars. So it was very hard for me to get there. Man.
What they did is they intertwined reality into this fictitious superhero message board system, right? Everybody knew before Epstein's arrest that Epstein was trafficking in children and had crazy connections to all sorts of people, not only in Hollywood, but in government. That was already there. And when you saw the New York Police Department, it was the NYPD, finally pull the trigger, again, it gave hope to that narrative, right? Oh, well, they were putting that in there. But the things that they were slick about was putting out all this disinformation where every single Hollywood superstar was wearing an ankle bracelet. Still going on today, right? Like, people are saying Oprah was wearing a bracelet in that latest thing. I mean, and playing on it. And, me being in this game for so long and seeing some of the people that were saying that they had the top secret inside info. And I hate calling people out, but like David Wilcox is easy to call out because, I've been offered to be on shows like, Ancient Alien type things, or even before 2012, they tried to get me on one of those shows. And I would never sell out to it because it's bullshit. And it's like, look, I've looked at all this stuff. It's not something I'm going to talk about with any gravity. I'm not here to grift anybody. And, what's even more upsetting is you have and I'll call him out because it's easy to do as well, the Robert David Steeles of the world that came in very early on with legitimate information. It seems like he really does have a CI connection, like he was an actual officer, which should raise alarm bells on people anyway. But he was the first person to talk about the InQtel and Google connection. I remember him being on InfoWars 2008, 2009, explaining how Google was seed funded by the CIA. That was all great information. It's just like Benjamin Fulford used to work for Forbes, and he was giving out great information at first, and then he teamed up with Wilcox, and it was Nasara and Yakuza Illuminati stuff behind the scenes. And I saw all these precursors to the Q, and I'm like, these guys are taking advantage of it. And look what it's done. Now I talk about, for instance, and I'm going to be really careful about just saying this, Tommy Hearns on his Instagram, and we're going to do it live, so I don't get in trouble for daring to put this on screen. But Tommy Hearns on his Instagram, I was just, obviously everybody knows that Marvin Hagler died yesterday, and yes, Marvin Hagler passed away. Now I see that, and immediately we start talking to him in the bar because we live in a normal place in Iowa. So
nice. Nice.
Yes. Oh, dude, it was great. We're in the bar. We hear that. We're kind of upset. And right away, somebody hits me in my comments that Tommy Hearns had posted this on his Instagram. Let me read it for people. A real true warrior. And that's Marvin Hagler right there. Pray for the king and his family. He's in ICU fighting the after effects of the vaccine. He'll be just fine, but we could use positive energy and prayer for his full recovery. So prior to his death yesterday, Thomas Hearns put that out. I'm not going to say another word. But, if I went further, maybe this gets pulled off for medical misinformation. That's the age we're now in, and I feel like that's probably one of the reasons you decided to end up going to D.C. Because even on that level, you could see the deception that now we've been under for really a year in this country. It's the 14th, 1 full year. So
it's amazing.
It is astounding. So we meet up the day before on the 5th where there's like a smaller rally. I'm live streaming. We actually end up having a couple beers. So I got to stop myself because I'm still driving and everybody's handing me beers. I'm like, all right, guys, geez, oh. And
you're like a movie star.
it was ridiculous. It's nice to see the people watch and stuff like that, and that you get to talk to all these people. But what I really liked about the entire event is it was a bunch of people, not in fear, not wearing masks, right? We even walked through the little line to go get the beers on an outside patio afterwards, sitting, having conversations, and being human beings with one another. So, I mean, how did you feel about that? Now, obviously, we didn't see each other the next day, but when you got to the actual ellipse, and now you're talking about hundreds of thousands of people minimum in that same thing with that brotherhood, how did it make you feel? I mean, I felt good
I
about
tell
it.
you, as a guy that is red, white, and blue, and it was amazing to see the spirit of the people, and I don't know what they say. Would they say thousands, tens of thousands? To me, there had to be hundreds of thousands of people. If there was one person there had to be 500,000. And as far as the eye could see at the ellipse, the energy, people were singing, praying, doing whatever they do. But it was just a really cool atmosphere. And nobody was wearing a mask. Everybody was shoulder to shoulder. And it was it was just an interesting vibe. And I just wanted to experience it, like I said. And then we did the walk from the ellipse heading down to the Capitol. And, everything was just people talking, cheering, praying, singing songs. And then as we got closer to the Capitol, because it was about probably a 20 or 30 minute walk, as you know, just because of the sheer mass of people. Plus, I don't know how many, it was a mile or a mile and a half. I don't know how far the walk was. And, we got down there. And there's food trucks. I remember getting the hot dog, where the alleged insurrection was going down. There was food trucks lined up. And
quite the insurrection. You can grab a hot dog and a pretzel.
And I was with my wife and my sister. I'm like, seeing like the masses up by the couch. Let's grab a hot dog and grab something to drink, use the bathroom, and let's get close. Let's get close up. I want to get some video footage, take some pictures. This was kind of a cool atmosphere. And people are blowing my phone up, like, are you all right? Be careful. And I'm thinking, what's going on? Be careful. I keep getting all these texts, and it didn't make sense to me at the time. But we got all the way up to we're watching where they were climbing up the walls, and we're standing on the grass there, and we ended up going, and people are screaming down at the guys like, hey, there's a set of stairs right around the corner instead of climbing up. If you want to do it the easy way, right? So we went up around there, and just kind of experienced the whole thing. And you could see people, where the doorway was, people were kind of jammed in there, and there was nobody being crazy at the time. At least, in the beginning it was, and then the cops had kind of cordoned it off. Everything was cool. Everything was chill. It wasn't like chaotic, at least not where I was.
No, there was only those pockets, and actually I filmed a lot of those. It was up on the second level where you had that one area where the police had barricaded, because you had the police on the top level. Nobody was doing anything up there after people had gotten by. And then where they smashed in, and I recorded them doing it, the window, and put people through. But everybody around me, from the 65-year-old grandma, to the 30-year-old business worker, it felt like a Dave Matthews concert. Like if you had whipped out a beach ball and like popped it around, that's really more the vibe. And that's why, anybody trying to call this an insurrection just doesn't understand what a true insurrection in any other country ever through the history of humanity actually is.
Or the second 9/11. Remember that one? They were calling it, this is the modern day 9/11. I'm like,
I was getting those same texts from my mother. She was texting me, and I was actually on the Capitol, but I couldn't live stream, so I was taking footage and trying to upload it. She's asking, I'm like, Mom, I'm fine. Like, I remember being at like the what was it? I think it was the G20 in 2009. And that was way more of I might get pepper sprayed or hit with a rubber bullet atmosphere where I had my back.
right.
And I'm, it's not like I put myself in harm. I usually know when to get out. I don't think I've ever really been scared, but I got to tell you, there was no moment where I was fearful that anything physically was going to happen to me there. And I was surprised because people were saying that somebody had been shot. And, the one thing that I did notice is when I first approached, one of the flashbangs went off, with the CS gas. And at first I was looking around, but after I found out what it was, and I'd been there for like 30, 40 minutes recording and saw everybody was retreating and, there wasn't really a lot of violence, I'm like, oh, this is going to be easy. And they've now tried to use it to change the laws in our country to make people like yourself, who don't identify as a Republican, are not a Trump supporter like me, domestic terrorists. And this is something, that we've seen incrementally done, talked about, put on paper in think tanks since 9/11. So, again, from your perspective, how does that make you feel after describing what you just did that actually happened at the Capitol?
Yeah, no, it was when I heard that reference, I said, this is just insane. And it was amazing. That day when we got back to the hotel about 5 o'clock that night, we turned on the TV and we're seeing all this, the insurrection and the chaos at the Capitol. And I'm thinking, I was just there. This is not what they're portraying on TV is not what the environment that we experienced down there and that you experienced down there. And it's just amazing to me that with the media, when they control the narrative and they take clips, whether things were orchestrated to be that way. There's all this talk about people handing out weapons there on this. I didn't see any of that, but.
I recorded, I should pull it up, but I pulled it up on past broadcasts while I was up there and you had that barricade, right? Now, they tried to pass up out of nowhere a sledgehammer. So you see this sledgehammer come up and I've got it on tape and I'm sitting there going, dude, you'll catch a murder charge, again,
right.
I've talked to the Wall Street Journal since. NBC News stole some of my footage, put it as their exclusive. I'm talking to their lawyers. Like, it's so funny. I'm not a journalist till you steal my shit. Right. But I'm watching this and I've seen it nowhere else, but it gets up to the front where the police are and the dude takes it and hands it to the cops because he doesn't want anybody to get hurt either. Didn't see that on the news. No. That was probably, out of everything I saw, that you can use those bear mace canisters, and obviously we saw the person who threw the fire extinguisher, but even that was manipulated, right? So a guy.
Yeah, that was. It turns out that what never happened.
Well,
right?
it happened, but not to that guy. So they showed a video of the guy throwing the fire extinguisher, and it hits the guy, and it's not good. But then all of a sudden they say that the one police officer that was murdered at the Capitol, he died from his injuries of this. Number one, he was never hit by a fire extinguisher, completely separate incident. Number two, he didn't die of bear mace, which they tried to say it was chemical. He died of a heart attack 4 days later. People die, and it wasn't like he got a jab or anything, guys. He lived through an event that literally hundreds, if not 1,000 or so officers also lived through and did just fine. They did just fine. And I'm not promoting violence. I'm not saying people that attack people shouldn't be charged, but we got laws for them. To call
and there was plenty of people, Jason, like when I was right up where the cops were, and I haven't been in those shoes. I said, hey guys, be safe. And a lot of people, hey, be safe. No, but it wasn't like this clash of. Now there's a couple of bad actors, right?
Yeah.
But you got 500,000 people. You're going to have, a couple of hundred knuckleheads. And unfortunately, that's whether it was orchestrated. My conspiracy mind tells me that this was orchestrated to portray something that fits their narrative and their agenda. But
at the end of the day,
and they did a good job of that.
Well,
right?
At the end of the day, they make a topless, face-painted man with a buffalo headdress who's a 33-year-old dude who lives with his mother, who stopped people from stealing muffins in the hallway. He's the fucking muffin man. As the guy that led the insurrection. And what did he do? He took a selfie with a flag on the top of an unoccupied area in D.C. That's it. When you fucking throw the line, and I hate to curse so much in there, that far down the rail, that this is the new threat to America, this is the new Bin Laden, or this is the new Noriega, or just substitute another, dozen of these people in there, you're out of your mind. I can't relate. I don't even know what planet you're on. And people have become so polarized that some people will just shut off. It doesn't matter how funny I try to be about it. They just cannot imagine that anything that Rachel Maddow or Nancy Pelosi or Joe Scarborough tells them would be anything but the 100% truth. So, being on both sides of that, how do we combat that, Richie?
I don't know. It's fun. And I'm sure you're a much bigger presence, social media wise with your channel. I had people I knew, like kind of disown me on on Facebook or Instagram because I posted a few pictures that we were there that day, and people were like freaking out, like, oh my God, I can't believe you did that. I'm like, did what? I went to DC for a rally, but they believe they've been brainwashed, and they believe that this was an insurrection, and people were unruly, and it couldn't be further from the truth. The environment there was amazing. How do we combat that? It's tough with I feel, what's the saying that you say? It's not about right or wrong. It's about truth.
It's not about left or right. It's about right or wrong.
It's about right.
Every time.
That's it. Yeah. And unfortunately, with guys like yourself and other personalities being banned that are trying to put truth out there, at least with the best intentions, or questioning things, if you can't even question the official narrative, and that's what people are being suppressed. I mean, that's where ideas are exchanged. That's what woke me up. Guys like you and other people that just questioning the official story. And I knew from my gut, everything in me being down there, it didn't make sense. I was walking 210 story buildings. I couldn't see a desk. I couldn't see a computer. I couldn't identify. It was like everything was pulverized. It was rebar, steel, and moon dust. That's what it was. And, so that it's just, I don't know how, that's a great question. That's the $1 million question. I know there's alternative platforms, and hopefully some of those will get traction and they just won't be buried in the corner, but it's kind of like a modern day book burning, right? They just continue to rewrite history and, mute the folks that are questioning the official narrative so that the sheeple don't wake up. Because I think, not to go backwards, but this whole Trump phenomenon, if there's anything good that came out of it, some people that were the people that I was vomiting on about my whole, the government isn't as good as you think, and 9/11 was an inside job. And over the years, a lot of the things that I questioned, some of those people actually started to question things, whether it was the right information or the wrong information, or it was disinformation. At least people were starting, I feel like the last year, a lot more people. But at the same time, it's driven a wedge between the people that question and the people that, left and right, call it, right?
Yeah.
So the division has just been, it's just, I've never seen anything like it. And I see it even with my kids and their teenagers in school. Like, when the hell was that ever a thing when we were in high school? Nobody talked politics. Like, now politics has gone mainstream, and my kids are talking about, this person, they want to be careful because they want to be cool in the crowd, but Trump is, the orange guy, and this, and, all this.
Well,
it's crazy what's going on.
If you're like anti-mask, right? People out of the gates, you must be a Trumper. No! What are you talking about? Now you're equating me not wanting to be a slave with I support Donald Trump. And then it's like,
exactly.
Well, there are things that I don't like about Donald Trump either. And I start talking about Syria and the false flag in Duma, and that's a real issue. Or running on, love the WikiLeaks, can't get enough of the WikiLeaks. How about those WikiLeaks? And then you're the guy that puts the Justice Department onto Assange to basically torture him 3/4 of your presidency. And on top of that, put him in prison for the rest of his life, not pardon him. There are huge problems with Trump, but it's not orange man bad, or he's grabbing him by the pussy, or he's a racist, and da-da-da-da-da. They're all distraction issues. And I'm like, I know what you're going to point to because I've already seen all your arguments, and the vast majority of them are taken out of context for an agenda to demonize a guy that just tried to give you cheaper health coverage in the way of big pharma drugs, and you still shit down his neck. I mean, that guy went so far Bernie Sanders in the last year, especially during this crisis of giving people money, cutting
right.
big medical, all these things that the progressives and the super leftists have promised for years. He does it, crickets. And it's this cognitive dissonance. It's this team baseball mentality that I truly do believe that we have to wake people out of and make them understand. Look, I'm not wearing a red armband with an elephant on it. I'm just not. I'm not that guy either. I don't want you to be the person that's like Team Donkey because it's Team Donkey. Like, right. It's jackassery at its highest level. So,
here's the kicker, Jason. What happens? I mean, for the people that believe the system was legitimate and that voting really mattered, what next? I mean, after 2020, I'm already starting to see Trump 2024, and people like, yeah, I'm thinking, are you stuck on stupid? I mean, what just transpired that clearly it wasn't above board, even if you were on the Trump side or whatever. I mean, something fishy happened. It wasn't a legitimate election, or at least above board.
Well, let's just say this.
Who would think that 2024 is going to be any different? Like, it's just the false left-right paradigm. They just continue to keep you in this perpetual left versus right. My team's going to beat your team, and they give you a little power for a few years, and it swings back the other way. And the rhetoric is different, and the policies are the same.
Would be disaster. And you're 100% right, and I said the same thing. 2024 Trump would be a disaster because unless you fix the infrastructure that's been corrupted more and more and more over the past 20 years, this wasn't hanging chads and, Bush versus Gore. Although the Supreme Court actually looked at that case and didn't just say out of standing they weren't going to look at the evidence, right? So we're talking about all sorts of problems. It should be one person, one vote. Fractional voting's a joke. We have the technology to do this. Mail-in voting without any validation is a joke. We had absentee ballots for people that were not going to be around for a reason, and you had to jump through hoops to get them. And even that was not totally beyond corruption. Nothing is. But certainly the system we had in place in 2020, and unless we do something, the one that we will have in place in 2024 will not be a good one. And, to think
the best part,
the
best part is the people that believed in the hope that Trump was saving America. Mm-hmm. He had 4 years knowing that they were going to steal this election, right? So he had 4 years to kind of prepare for this, right?
Yeah.
I think in 2008, they knew this was going to happen. And the white hats or whoever it is, these people that were planning for 20 years and chose Trump to be the chosen one. He was going to take down it's like, I'm just like, come on, you're going to tell me you're going to now believe with what just transpired that 2024 is going to be any more legitimate?
And again, Richie, I've been trying to tell people this. John Bolton wasn't your friend. Mattis wasn't your friend. Bill Barr was never your buddy. Okay, he might have said some nice things here and there, but, I hearken back to that interview especially where he's sitting there and gets asked about Jeffrey Epstein and the suicide situation. And he talks about, can we guarantee that's not going to happen to Ghislaine Maxwell? And he looks at him, he's like, yes. And then they burst out into laughter like it's the funniest fucking thing in the world. Like that's the world we live in. We live in a world where they give mass murderers like Cuomo Emmys for supposedly doing his job and having press conferences. We should be sick to our stomachs, Richie. Now, I know we discussed a little bit over in D.C. that you might be starting your own podcast. Tell us about that.
I haven't. I told you you're one of my inspirations. Mm-hmm. I said because I tend to get into a lot of this stuff, and my journey has been I've gotten into politics a little bit in the sense that looking at it from a different angle and questioning things, and I'm fascinated. I've read books on the Federal Reserve and uncovering that monetary history, and then fast forward to what the blockchain, how it's changing things, and how the Great Reset, like all that stuff. So I'm like, I guess maybe I just turn on YouTube, record myself, and maybe like Jason Bermas, some people tune in and they want to hear blue collar chatter. I don't know. I'm not from the brain trust, but I think I have a pretty good grasp of certain things. But I would love So I haven't done it, but I told you when I met you in D.C., I'm like, man, this is the year, right? The 20-year anniversary of 9/11. I said, I want to have Jason Bermas on my YouTube channel to talk 9/11, and who better? So, or at least right around that time. But I haven't launched it. But after this call, I think I'm definitely going to take the next step and just do it. Like I do everything else, just get in motion and fail forward. And maybe some people tell me to go fuck myself. Can I say that on here?
It's bound to happen. But yeah, I'll tell you right now, Richie, my audience loved you. And I love this interview. I think it's been great. We're going to have to do it again. I know, I'm always on, the backdrop of Twitter. Sometimes I fall out, but I always try to remember when we actually set these things up. There's another guy I met out there. I had, Fake Mike Real News on this week as well. He's somebody I met out there the first time I was in D.C. in December. There's another guy that worked amongst a lot of the Epstein Trust people that I met there. And, I know I reached out to you man, it was probably a couple months ago, and then just got back to you last week. But we're going to have to do it again before a couple months. And you launch anything, you let me know, brother, and we'll have you on to launch it right here. Richie, is there anything you want to end with for my audience?
Yeah, no, I just want to thank you, Jason. Really, I really appreciate the work that you do. I'm a big fan of your channel. I subscribe to your channel, and I just want to support guys like you in the alternative media, because I think it's important that you guys have the opportunity. And look, everybody has to eat. Everybody has to put food on the table. And, you know, I wish you all the best with what you're doing with Rockfin. Hopefully everybody becomes a paid subscribe member, man, and you can continue to expand I know you have aspirations for expanding and doing some big things, man. And I'm one of your fans, and I appreciate you letting me have an opportunity to come on, and hopefully we'll see you again and share another beer. If you're ever in North Carolina, Charlotte, you know, you got a place to stay. You got a place to come. I got a couple of beer taps right there, if you could see those.
Oh, nice. It looks like a great neighborhood, man. You look like you got some water behind you and everything.
That's my pool. Yeah, it's just
okay.
my pool. But the dogs would be barking inside, so I have a little all-season room. But yeah, that's it, man. I appreciate it. It was great talking with you. I appreciate it. I'll be tuning in. Maybe I'll throw a few chats in the when you're doing those live sessions. But anytime, reach out. When I get myself together, I'm going to reach out to you, and hopefully you give me some of your time and have you come on and talk again.
Brother, of course. And again, my audience loved it. This was a great discussion, and we're going to talk soon. So, Rich, you have a great rest of the day, brother.
Yes, sir. You too. Thank you.
And everybody, that was Richie Scola. Rockfin. At least make the free Rockfin account. I want to thank AJ Torrey over there for throwing out the tips, and Scipio as well on the Rockfin stream. You guys rock over there. You guys killing it for Jason Burmis. We really appreciate that. But he's right. I actually am trying to expand. I drove down the street where this property was located just yesterday, kind of checking out the neighborhood. And he's right. While they're trying to shut it down, I'm trying to expand. And I can only do it with your help. So at least make the free account on Rockfin. If you can endorse me, great. The other links are down below. I absolutely love you guys. I hope you enjoyed this one. And I will see you all on the flip side.